Tally-ho, we got royals today. Crazy that. Anyway, we are researching the history of alpacas using early 1800s newspapers. Britain has just helped South America gain its independence. She has opened their markets for their goods to be flown back to the British Isles. Among these goods were four-legged, quote, sheep goats, or alpacas. They quickly became an item of fascination, but the main concern at the back of everyone's head was their exceptional, never-before-seen wool. The wool's exceptionalism was repeated everywhere alpacas were mentioned. And I mean, I got a pair of alpaca socks here. And I mean, they are pretty soft. Can you hear? They weren't wrong. This was also realized in the 1800s by places like Birmingham's British Association. In one of their meetups, their members got to touch and compare all kinds of wools from around the world, from all kinds of animals. And you can probably guess what their conclusion was. Alpaca wool was the finest wool they had ever touched. It was unrivaled perfection. And this wasn't just an expert opinion, but seemingly a common belief that also reflected on the economy. Although their importation process was slow at first, by 1841 alone, Britain would import £1 million or 50 million euros in today's money worth of alpaca wool from South America. The price of the alpaca wool was consistently 2 to 5 times the price of sheep wool. So indeed, it was a kind of gold in the context of the world's wool markets. But what was the wool actually used for, or even planned to be used for? Surely it had potential for more than just fiddling material, and this would of course be correct, as eventually, especially as the manufacturing process improved and one queen took her jab at the trade, the wool, as a silky, breathing, water-resistant material, would be used to create all kinds of luxury items, such as coats, dresses, ties, scarves, umbrellas, and hats. It was also used to create a couple Scottish kilts and jackets for the explorers of the tropics. The problem for the longest time, however, was obviously the fact that a couple domestic alpacas used as curiosities did not quite fulfill the need for all the items, and thus the vast majority of alpaca wool was bought and imported from South America. Because of this state of affairs, the press was full of angry comments like, "Why would raw wool be brought all the way from Peru? Why does this South American country work as a middleman and take money from the transaction?" And Peruvian primitive Indians with their primitive methods don't even take full advantage and profit they could get from their alpacas. Here in Great Britain, in a better environment, they would be better off and more could be gotten out of them. Why don't we settle the alpaca directly into our empire? This is indeed why the idea of introducing the alpaca into Britain or anywhere else in the empire became a consideration to be taken seriously. It was proposed by the press, obviously, but also by private individuals, commercial and other thematic societies, as well as the science community in the form of several knowledgeable people like William Walton. Guy should be familiar if you would check the previous video. In a nutshell, he was this crazy, ambitious, adventurer scientist type that laid the groundwork for all the info available on South America's camelids. He and, via him, Liverpool's Natural History Society suggested that the best potential places for the alpaca in the imperial core would be the Scottish Highlands or Ireland, because these places were, quote, wasteland. Places where sheep would starve to death, but the alpacas could thrive, just like back in their home in Peru. So thus, these lands left unused could finally be used for something economically profitable. Amazing! Thus, the alpaca was an easy economic net positive, and they fixed this issue. Or at least for those few men who could actually afford the initial investment. chasing profits and shipping at once several live animals like alpacas to the British Isles across an entire ocean wasn't an easy process, as one might imagine. Now, this did not, of course, mean that people did not try. Relatively early on in the 1800s, a total of 10 or so alpacas managed to find their way to the British Isles to be used exclusively for wool production. These new animal owners, as one might expect, were all immensely wealthy, well-connected British gentlemen. People with immense amounts of capital, as well as contacts to South America via captains that sailed to the region consistently. In practice, the alpaca owners were thus nobles, counts, and rich bourgeois. But, perhaps luckily for the alpacas, most of these gentlemen also understood the great value of their gold-bearing animals and actually went to sizable lengths to attempt to treat them right. One example of these gentlemen was the Count of Derby. He introduced alpacas to two places in the UK. Princely Knowsley, just outside of Liverpool, and the Scottish Highlands, the seeming promised land for all the alpacas. But despite the high costs and promises of wealth and prosperity, it was not all smooth sailing. Apparently, at first, the alpacas got sick, pretty bad, but eventually they apparently got used to the conditions of their new home. It was proposed that this might have been because of the alpacas being, quote, animals of warmer climates, so that transferring them to colder climates obviously degenerated them. Others, however, thought that the alpacas were capable of enduring most, if not all, climate-related issues. They were thus thought of as the true super species. So it could not have been the climate. Another reason to the occasional alpaca sickness proposed by Walton then was that the alpacas grazed on wrong types of pastures. Something must have been wrong with the soil, he pondered. To fix this, he proposed giving the alpacas, unironically, worse pastures so that they would not be overfed. So the issue was not then the climate, but the grass. Or like, maybe it was the long ocean voyages and the lack of a proper diet. Just a guess. Well, another one of these alpaca gentlemen was Mr. Alexander Gatshore Stirling. He had good contacts to South America via a captain he knew, so he ordered him to bring him a male and a female alpaca. To his disappointment, however, once the alpacas stepped outside of the ship and Gatshore Stirling went and had a check on them, he realized that they were both females. But luckily for the guy, he had the aforementioned Count of Derby to trade his female for one male with. Now content with his arranged marriage, Gatshore Stirling then put his alpacas in a fencing together with the sheep he owned. The sheep were at first apparently quite absolutely astonished of these queer quadrupeds. After a couple days, however, the sheep understood that the alpacas were not a threat, and everyone became the best of friends, and all these critters grazed together in harmony. Gatshore Stirling, however, tells that the most amusing part happened when his pony saw the alpacas. Upon seeing them for the first time, the pony apparently went wild, began galloping, kicked the air and chuffed. The alpacas then, out of their curiosity, only came closer to come and have a look at the bewildered pony, which did not relieve the situation at all. The start of the relationship between the two parties then seemed to have been rather rough. But after 8 or so days, both sides apparently learned to get along just perfectly. And so the whole farm became friends with the newcomers. Very wholesome. In autumn, before the winter, a little cottage or a shelter was built for the alpacas. When the snow came, the alpacas did not at first apparently care to use it. But when a caretaker, which the alpacas, quote, followed like dogs, put some hay into the hut, the alpacas apparently became interested in the structure and began using it. Gatshore Stirling and his team attempted to feed the alpacas all kinds of food, like sweets, oats and beans. The beans were apparently their favorites, and once they were available, everything else remained uneaten. From today's perspective, we do of course know that legumes should be kept at a minimum and hay at a maximum, not the other way around. Either way, Gatshore Stirling describes the alpacas as easily kept, disease-resistant, compared to the previous one, pretty interesting, and tame, for they apparently never even attempted to jump over their fence. Sometime later in the 1840s, our now experienced alpaca entrepreneur, Gatshore Stirling, would even visit Highland Society's agricultural show. 1,404 animals were seen in total, including 222 Ayrshire cattle, 55 West Highland cattle, 160 horses, and 117 sheep. Among these were also Mr. Stirling and his alpacas. From all the 1,404 animals showcased, Stirling got the silver prize, and his new baby alpaca he managed to breed even got a picture taken. Sadly, no pictures on the actual article though, so you have to imagine it. Well, anyway, all of these stories of alpacas rather clearly reflects how well the upper class attempted to take care of their new four-legged animals, and how appreciated the alpacas were, to be even getting medals. Above the alpaca appreciating upper class was, however, yet another alpaca appreciating upper class. Yes, we are talking of the Queen. Yeah, this is the part we've all been waiting for. Two alpacas, a female and a pitch black male, arrived to the Royal Windsor Court in the 1830s. 36 probably. As with many other ladies and gentlemen covered earlier, the adorable camelids also filled the hearts of royals. So it's not probably too surprising to hear that these alpacas immediately became Queen Victoria's favorites. And just like the others of her time, she praised the alpacas for their dainty appearance and gentle behavior. The alpacas were left to graze on a land near the estate, and things seemed excellent between the Queen and her alpacas. Or that would be until Her Majesty's jet black male alpaca was shorn. For after that, he became ill. Very ill. And sadly, he would soon pass away. Perhaps he got an infection from novice shearers, or perhaps it had nothing to do with the shearing. Who knows? What we do know, however, is that Queen Victoria was heartbroken. Grieving. So to respect the memory of the late Mr. Alpaca, and to really kickstart the nation's alpaca industry, Victoria ordered a to-be signature green Victoria-esque dress to be crafted from the wool shorn. Mr. James Whiteley and Messrs. Took care of preparing the wool, and William Fison and Company from the little town of Bradford put their dress together using their looms. The finished dress was blue and black, and it had a figure of Lady Breton with a sparkling crown, 2 lions and foliage patterns. The making of this dress was the first time an entire alpaca's wool was used for the industrial manufacturing of anything. So a huge milestone for the developing industry. Victoria seemed busy in December, so the Queen's husband, Prince Albert, received the dress in Windsor. He was pleased with the quality of the work, the innovativeness of the creators, and the silky feel of the dress. His Majesty also took a look at alpaca wool string, and was rather impressed with the quick development of this completely new industry, as well as the possibilities brought via coloring. He saw great potential in the new wool, and wished that the development of alpaca wool industry would benefit the town of Bradford. Large-scale industrial manufacturing of alpaca wool can be said to have started from this event. I'm not going to go too much in depth like we did last time with the microstructure of alpaca wool, but typically in this manufacturing process, alpaca wool was mixed together with chemicals and other woolly materials like Angora goat or mohair and then dyed. The outcome was, of course, some exceptional string ready to be used for the creation of all kinds of clothes and items. As the royals had hoped, the newly gained fame from Her Majesty's dress quickly sparked life to the little town of Bradford, and it would be further spearheaded by an industrialist named Titus Salt. The story of how he himself first discovered the wool in a Yorkshire warehouse in 1835 is well known. It was featured in Charles Dickens's magazine, Household Words. Yeah, that's some reading for you if you're interested. Check the description. Well, anyway, the products of the brand new alpaca wool manufacturing industry would become famous both locally and globally. News of Her Majesty's glorious new dress spread through the US, Germany, and especially Spain. Funnily enough, in the latter, women began wearing black alpaca wool dresses to church, a trend which would also spread through surrounding countries. Stealing those alpacas from Spain must have stung now. Well, in Britain, black alpaca clothes were loved especially by the clergy and the judiciary. We've all seen judges, they need their black capes, you know. The nobility, meanwhile, ordered same types of fantastical dresses as the Queen herself had ordered. Things seemed great, but this alpaca clothing trend would also attract imitators and knockoff brands. They made alpaca, in heavy quotations, wool clothes from cheaper and in every way worse materials, like cotton. Yeah, but since the demand was incredibly high, and the supply still rather low, even these bootleg firms prospered. This still rather troubling lack of supply was also the reason why even Prince Albert himself decided to order himself more alpacas to his royal alpaca herd. Her Majesty, meanwhile, would keep extending her patronages to the little town of Bradford, and the town kept on prospering. There are news reports from, for example, the 1840s of a held private banquet. Several speeches were held, and the Queen as well as the alpacas were praised vigorously. The myth, the legend, William Walton himself also attended the event, and he put it thus. It was a most beautiful, interesting and docile animal, and the Creator had not given man a more valuable farming stock. Applause and cries of "Hear! Hear!" He also explained that the development of the alpaca wool industry seemed to be going well, and that if the demand would be ever increasing, even Peru's alpacas would not be enough. For this, absolutely, more alpacas were needed in Britain. And just as there was more demand for alpacas, there was also more demand for manufacturing. Thus, the little town of Bradford was getting crowded, as admitted by our alpaca industrialist Mr. Salt. He was very much correct. The place was becoming the entire world's wool processing capital. So, less than a decade later, Salt went and built a new mill and an entire new town around it for his workers, 3 miles north of Bradford in Shipley. It had all the services one could ever need, except for alcohol. That was not sold in the town. This was because Salt felt like he had the duty of doing God's work. Indeed, the man was religious, but a lot more than that as well. For he was also a defender of liberalism, workers' rights, pacifism, and philanthropy. The guy gave away £170,000, or £60 million in today's money worth of gifts, to Bradford and the surrounding areas. All the way to Germany, actually. Bradford attracted a lot of German merchants, so that one explains that one. But as much as he cared for his people, and he truly did, no question about that, he failed to safeguard the welfare for the source of his riches, the alpacas themselves. For outside of his control in the supply line were several cases of gross alpaca misconduct. And I suppose karma is real, for this is what would end up biting the entire industry in the ass. We've mostly stayed at the nice and wholesome stuff until now. A couple alpacas died here and there, but that was really nothing compared to the worst this new trade had to offer. Indeed, although a lot of alpacas seem to have just fine enough lives, a way too large number of them also perished prematurely due to a wrong kind of care, overall carelessness, and most notably the long ocean voyages. For example, an entrepreneur, Thomas Stevenson, decided to bring in a large number of alpacas from Peru via his son that lived there. From the dozens of alpacas stuffed into the cargo ship he ordered, only 2 survived the journey alive. Another example is Charles Tayleure. He owned a sizable herd of alpacas in Britain, but the shepherd he hired managed to kill the vast majority of them via a too strong medicine. So he claims. Robert Bell, meanwhile, was the first man to bring the alpacas to Ireland. A real Irish nationalist type, he claimed that his alpacas were thriving better from Ireland's vegetation than any alpaca he had ever seen in England. Ironically enough, at least one of his alpacas died from eating this so superior Irish vegetation. Ireland's superior flora just happened to contain poisonous plants. But unfortunately, these cases were nothing compared to what was to come. In 1842, a group of gentlemen rented a migrant ship that had just returned from Australia and filled it with 274 alpacas on Peru's coast. This was the largest amount of alpacas that had ever been stuffed into a single ship. To maximize profits, a large amount of guano, that be bird poop used as fertilizer, was also stuffed into this same ship between the stories. Meanwhile, crypts and fencings were built for the animals, and the alpacas were made ready for what was to come by feeding them European plants. When the eventful ocean voyage began, nearly half of the animals had younglings, little baby alpacas with them. Tragically, the lack of air exchange, together with a horrible smell emanating from the massive amount of bird shite, took their lives first. Eventually, the adults started dying as well, until the quote, poor animals died by the dozens a day. When the ship finally arrived in Liverpool, not a single alpaca had survived the voyage. All 274 were dead. All this, even though the captain and the crew claimed that they had done everything to take care of the alpacas. The quote, gentlemen that had decided to load their ship full of bird shite, however, blamed these lower-class sailors for what had happened. Well, besides their underlings, they also blamed the Peruvian natives for tricking them by selling them old and sickly animals. A gentleman named General O'Brien, for example, hypothesized that the Peruvians deliberately only sold their worst alpacas because they did not want to sell the best. And this, quote, Peruvian stupidity was apparently the reason the ship was stuffed full of low-quality alpacas, which could not have survived the ocean voyage even if there had not been any bird shite involved. This is the most cope shite I have ever read. Blame everyone but yourself? Okay. Upon the Peruvian sellers themselves hearing of what had happened to their alpacas, the native herders started massive demonstrations, strikes, and protests within Peru. Because the alpaca industry was a massive source of income for the Peruvian state, the Peruvian government decided to, quite reasonably, ban the export of live alpacas away from the country 200 kilometers plus to the sea. The ban came to effect in 1845. Upon breaking this new law, the penalty was the confiscation of the animals and 10 years of hard labor in the guano, the bird shite islands. Beautiful and ironic. Yup, karma. When the Brits heard of this, they could not accept that there was a genuine care for the animals behind this new policy. They argued that the reasoning behind the export ban was purely financial. The Peruvians apparently wanted to unfairly keep their alpaca monopoly. So essentially, the Brits kept on huffing their copium and seething with their same stupid arguments, as if this helped in any way whatsoever. Now, having researched this particular topic, maybe a bit too much, let's be real, I can confirm that this is not the end. There's much more to this even off the export ban. And guess what? It involves insane adventuring, smuggling, biopiracy, a prison escape, and, because of course it does, Australia. But since this particular video is mainly focused on the British Isles, and not the Empire, and I happen to have already written a peer-reviewed paper on this Australia topic, I think I'll leave the alpaca theme be for now. I'll leave my paper in the description if you're interested for more. It's not in English, so use Google Translate or an AI and you should be fine. Yeah. Yup, and besides that, do follow, subscribe and hit the bell, or whatever gizmo is in the site you are watching this from, to see more OG research type of content from me. But most importantly, do take care of your fellow four-legged beings, and I suppose, goodbye.